it is a problem for China to find a market to replace the United States. They had not an overwhelming, but a significant export business to this country. And there are very few places they could hope to replace it. But Europe is number one on the possible places for them to do that. But the Europeans wouldn't allow the Chinese to do it unless, of course, the Chinese did for the Europeans what they need, because they're losing their market in the United States. So you have, a marriage of convenience between the Europeans and the Chinese, as each of them uses the other to soften the blow of anything Mr. Trump might do. Now,
Richard, you may bring Japan in as well.
Yeah, and now, Japan's a little different, but yes, especially after the bond market troubles of a few weeks ago now. Is it a few weeks? Yeah, a few weeks ago, when the Japanese were saying to the Americans, if I read it correctly, if you hit us with tariffs, we're going to rethink the purchase of U.S. treasuries that we have so conveniently done for you for 30, 40, or 50 years. That's another danger lurking. But let me finish this point. You are bringing together Europe and China. Let me stop everybody. That's an enormous part of the world economy right now. Anything that even a transactional president might do that would bring together the Europeans and the Chinese, and with the Chinese, the BRICS alliance, into, working together with the Europeans in jointly shared hostility to the United States. Well, you're now moving out of the range of a mistake into the range of stupid. This is stupid. What are you doing? This is, you're creating enormous difficulties for the Europeans, who don't want to deal with the Chinese because of the Chinese closeness to Russia and the fact that all European center and center-right governments now have nothing left but their anti-Russian politics as they die there. And Michael mentioned the Canadian election. Yes, but let's also add the Australian election of a few days ago, which did the same thing, in which a candidate, Albanese, who was far behind in the polls, became the major anti-Trump candidate and walked away with a very profound win. These are straws in the wind. You do not want to pretend that you don't see. And yet here they are. And then today's, I couldn't believe it. Today's Financial Times major story about EU companies grabbing market share from the Americans who can't do their business anymore. The Chinese are now showing that their system has enabled them to become rich and powerful enough that they are a competitor for the United States that the Soviet Union never came close to being. And so it's a completely different, you can't, it's a joke. It's that old joke. You can't have the same policy approaching a radically different situation and hope for the similar result. That's not a sign that you're sane. You're not doing the normal intellectual process of asking the relevant question. And the relevant question here is illustrated by headline in today's Financial Times, where you scratch your head and say, yeah, duh. The Europeans, while arguing against Mr. Trump, are quietly sending trade missions to China because they have a lot to talk about, the two of them. China needs to export to Europe. Europe needs to export to China. Germany has been exporting to China in a crucial way for many years. So the relationships are there, systems are there, the trade routes are there. Everything is in place for them to be able to do this, and they're now going to do it. And they're going to do it no matter what agreements are made by Starmer and Trump, because, again, for the British, unless they are unbelievably stupid, they're going to understand that the uncertainty alone means they have to do this. Not to do this with China, given what Trump has already shown him. And by the way, not just Trump, but the fact that at least for the moment, there's no visible corporate opposition. The corporate sector seems to be saying, let's see what Trump can do. Well, that's sending a message to everybody. It isn't just Trump. And even if Trump were to disappear in some magical way, why should they believe that there isn't another Trump waiting in the wings? And certainly Mr. Vance, if you know his career, that this is a man who puts his finger in the air, see which way the wind is blowing, and makes his political decisions based on that. We used to call that the activity of the Clinton family, but Mr. Vance has learned how to be. The reality is, and I'll say it as darkly as I can, that in recent weeks and months, we have learned from the Starbucks Corporation, the coffee shop chain, from the McDonald's Corporation, the hamburger chain, two of the most important, widely distributed fast food service industries, that they are in financial trouble. And they have released information indicating that their research in both cases shows that they're losing business from the lowest income group that patronize them. In other words, it's becoming unaffordable to get the latte at Starbucks or the Big Mac at McDonald's. All right. If that's the case, then I need to explain to everybody, if you haven't understood it, that both a general tariff and the de minimis, moving it from the $200 to the $800 and now taking it away, I believe as of tomorrow, or in any case, about now, it's being phased out, and all of those low-income packages will now be hit with duties, and very high duties. We're talking 145%. Doubling, more than doubling the price. Okay, a tariff is like a sales tax. It's a regressive tax. It makes no effort to account for the purchaser's ability to pay. It's not like the federal income tax. It's a regressive, not a progressive tax. Removing the $800 exemption for the de minimis is likewise a regressive act because it doubles the price like a sales tax might, and that's a well-known regress. So what are you doing? This entire package of policies can only worsen the already extreme inequality of income and wealth inside the United States. And I believe almost everyone, even right-wingers, understand what happens to social divisions, to animosities, to hostilities, to discrimination when you do that. That every social problem we know is aggravated. You know, the recent books, the work by the Princeton researchers about the middle class that's committing suicide and all the rest of it. The research is overwhelming that this is a, here we go, self-destructive program. So Michael just finished talking about how it's self-destructive globally, and I want you to see it's also extraordinarily self-destructive, I think, domestically. Mr. Trump is really strongly favoring the rich at the expense of everybody else, systematically, step by step. Whether he's aware of it or not, I don't know, and I don't care. Interesting reality is this is extraordinary. One last point. I think it's crucial to remind people that the transactional approach that Michael just illustrated or summarized, on again, off again, now you have a tariff, now you don't, now it's high, now it's low, now it may be just a negotiating ploy to get little gift he can run around the country and say to the American people, I got the minerals in Ukraine, or I got whatever the British gave away, etc., etc. The uncertainty, the non-fixity is an enormous reason why what Michael talked about will not be undone. Because even if you believe that Mr. Trump will simply be who he is for 4 years, you don't know whether the Democrats, if they win the next election, will not simply undo every tariff he did, which means you can't come back. They make no sense. But it even means that the only thing now is to get out of the dependence on the United States. It's too uncertain. And why is that important? Because even if it's less profitable temporarily for the Chinese to sell what they sell to Indonesia rather than to New York, they'll do that because a lower profit for a while is a better bet than the uncertainty of the deal they had in the United States. That will be as important a factor in the calculations of businesses around the world that are now going to do everything in their power to reduce their connection to the United States. It's the same thing. If he cuts a deal with Xi Jinping and the tariffs against China disappear or are reduced, it's too late. You've shown what you're prepared to do. Every Chinese company, even if they applaud reducing the tariffs, worry, when will they be imposed again? What set of difficulties in the United States and for the United States will lead it to try to solve its problems in this way? This is an empire whose decline is causing it difficulty, which it's trying to solve by making the rest of the world pay. Not understanding decline can't be fixed that way because it'll make the decline worse. That's what we're doing. Every other empire has done things like this. We're doing it as if it never happened before, as if no one had Mr. Trump's ear to say, be very careful. Declining empires have a nasty habit of trying to solve their problems by exploiting their empire situation, which only hastens then the demise. That this is a bizarre process in which the pursuit of the United States against China, calling it, and I think this is significant, another Cold War, means that there's the notion that your enemy now, China, is in some way comparable to the enmity with the Soviet Union of the second half of the 20th century. And that is a colossal mistake. Russia was a poor, backward economic mouse relative to the American elephant. That is not the case with China. And it's not a case with the rest of the world. It is not emerging out of its colonial status. It has had now 40 years or 50 years or 60 years to begin slowly but significantly to achieve an independence, not just political, but also, as much as the world economy allows anyone to be independent, to have an independent policy, to make a deal with China, which a colony could never have done before, etc., etc. So what you're seeing is the ironic consequence that a Cold War shifted from Soviet Union to China will have the opposite effect. You can argue that the Cold War against the Soviet Union isolated and eventually undid the Soviet Union. The reality is that the same policy of a Cold War against China is isolating the United States. It is literally removing the United States, moving it in an autarkic direction. I want to remind everyone that tariffs that make everything more expensive here, one way or another, means that other countries who have competitors to the United States will be able to buy their inputs at lower prices than American companies will have to pay because of the tariff wall. And that will diminish the competitiveness of the United States globally. And that will cost jobs, incomes, and will have a cumulative effect. To use the Marxian language, you are constricting the production of surplus here. And in the end, that's the lifeblood of the system's growth, and no financial manipulation that will help you escape from that self-destructive, self-isolating policy. Clearly, Europe's demise is in large part the product of the inability of the European countries to make a union strong enough to deal with the large union of China and its allies and the large America and its allies. And so, look, this goes back to the beginning of what Michael said. They are being pushed together by the United States on the one hand, and the victimization of China by the United States, leading the Chinese to be more willing than ever to make a deal with the Europeans, who are more willing than ever to do the same. That might be very, very dangerous for the United States, because it could mean the salvation of Europe and of China by them coming together. Who would have thought it, given the three poles of the world that we were in up to a few years ago? The United States Labor Department in the Trump administration made a decision. Actually, Mr. Trump made it. He let everyone know he made it. He instructed the Labor Department to change the existing law. Under the existing law here in the United States, any business that does work on contract for the federal government is required to pay a specific minimum wage. It's not the same as the minimum wage in the United States, which is an extraordinarily low $7.25. Now, this is the minimum wage for people who work on a contract for the federal government. What was it? It was $17.75. It had been raised a while back. Mr. Obama, if my memory's correct, had set it at $13.30 an hour, and then it was raised to $17.75 an hour. Now, during the first Trump administration, he didn't do anything about it. But now, in the second Trump administration, he has. And I want you to know what he's done, and I want you to think about what it means. He chose to reduce the minimum wage, to cancel that part of the law so that the government doesn't have to mandate or require those it contracts with to pay a minimum wage of $17.75 an hour anymore. That will lower the wage to what it was before, or maybe even lower. It's important to understand, it's one thing to allow inflation to erode what you can buy with your wage. It's another thing to directly diminish your wage. Hundreds of thousands, millions of workers work on contracts with the federal government. Those on the minimum wage are going to take a real hit. From $17.75 to $13.30 these days is quite a cut in your salary. Then there's Elon Musk, who recently said that he's in favor of privatizing Amtrak and the post office. Now, this reminds me of a very old argument given by right-wing business types. Here's how the argument goes. Amtrak is not making a lot of money, or it's losing. The post office is not making a lot of money, or it's losing money. And now let's compare that with private enterprises. And private enterprises, if they don't make money, go out of business. See how much more efficient the private is than the public. Now, I know it's not polite, and I'm going to take a moment to be impolite. This argument is fundamentally stupid. Let me explain why. If the Amtrak were going to charge the money, it would have to be profitable, which it can do. It doesn't have competitors for many of its runs. That would make it profitable, not a problem. But you know who would pay for that? You would, and I would, and every business that uses the rail system would face higher costs. By lowering the price, having the government run the railroad, it operates like a subsidy to private enterprise. Part of the reason private enterprises have whatever profit they do is because the railroad system operates, at least in part, at a loss, the public one. And this is even more true for the post office. By having the cost of your mail lower, but everybody else gets the benefit. The profits of every company are higher than they'd otherwise be if they had to pay for the mail service. What would profit a private mail? And if Mr. Elon Musk is correct and wins and gets it to be private, not only will he be probably among those who bid to do it, he wants that profit, but he'll charge a price, and all of us will learn what I'm explaining now, that this was not a good idea. Good for Mr. Musk, good for the private profiteers, but for the rest of us, including lots of private businesses, no. Don't make stupid comparisons. They lead to stupid policies. What are Mr. Trump's actions doing? Well, I want to focus on something you may not have thought about. When you deport large numbers of people, when you block immigration, whatever else you think about that, here are some of the economic consequences. In recent years, for example, even last year, 2024, Mexico, our big example, received $64.7 billion in remittances. Here's what that means. Mexican citizens emigrate, leave Mexico, come to the United States. In the United States, they take jobs. That's what the overwhelming majority of them have to do and do. They pay taxes to the United States government on what they earn. That's the law. And they, more than anybody, do not violate that law because it would risk not just the usual penalties, but the risk, especially now, of being deported or otherwise harassed by the authorities. And they live frugally. Why? Because they have to not only pay taxes on their earnings, but they send money home to help their families, just as every other immigrant population in the history of the United States did. But for Mexico, it adds up to 4% of their annual GDP. It's an enormous support. And then I started looking into it, and here's what I found. For Nicaragua, it's 27%. For Honduras, 25%. For El Salvador, 23%. For Guatemala, 19%. Haiti, 18%. And Jamaica, 18%. Huge benefit to those economies. They rely on it. If you don't let those people come in anymore, and we don't, and if you deport large numbers of them, and we do, the remittances will stop. They already have. Now you're hitting these economies with an incredible 1-2 punch. You are forcing back into that economy millions of American residents being pushed back. There are no jobs for them now, but there are going to be even fewer jobs because they can't bring any remittances anymore. They're not working in the United States. They can't send money home. So the economy will contract just as millions of young working age people come back looking for work. You know what you're doing to Central America? You're blowing it up. you're creating unlivable, dangerous, violent social conditions, which will come back to haunt the United States, threaten the United States. Is anyone even asking the question, is this worthwhile? What we are doing to our own country by hurting all these people and these countries in this way? Forget just the hatred, the social disruption. We will be hearing and reading about it as Mr. Trump's policies work their damage. If you want to understand why Mr. Trump decided that migration is a problem, that those poor immigrants from Central America are something he's going to fight against because they're foreign, and Americans seem to like to blame foreigners. Look at Mr. Trump. Canada, never done us any harm at all, is suddenly evil. To quote Mr. Trump, nasty. They are nasty people. What? He can talk about them. This sounds like he used to talk about the Soviets. And it should remind you of that. Mexico. Listen to Mr. Trump. The whole world is cheating us. Europe is cheating us. We're going to hit them with tariffs to fight back against these foreigners cheating us. The story of blaming them, it's always a foreigner. It's not a problem here. For example, it's not a problem that we have 3% of our people who are employers, and the other 97% are not. They're mostly employees. We allow the 3% employers to set the prices of everything we buy in the store. And they do it to help them, make profit for them, make them rich, and us not. They're the ones who donate to the candidates. They're the ones who sit behind the president, the billionaires. Come on. You don't think we have problems at home we ought to deal with? Of course you do. Of course you do. Blaming the foreigner. Here's the part about it. It's not that the foreigners are blameless. Of course they're not, no more or less than anybody else. But we live in a country that has made a very dangerous habit of not looking honestly or debating openly the problems we have as a society, and particularly our economic system that divides us into a small minority that own and operate the businesses and the rest of us that work from and buy from them. That's where we have to go. That's what we haven't done. And we shouldn't be fooled and misled by people who just want us once again to rev up the idea that those foreigners who are migrating in, and those bad Canadians, and those Mexicans, and those Europeans who cheat us. Come on. We're bigger, we're better, and we're smarter than all of that. Don't be fooled.